All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining in. We're going to be just another minute or so to let the audience shuffle in. All right. I think we're going to give it a go. Good morning, folks. Thank you for joining. Welcome to our newest innovation and impact. This is going to be a path to market focusing on loving your institutional customers. My name is Taylor Grossman. I'm a program associate at Prospect SV. Let's take a look here at the agenda. We're going to start off with quick introductions from Doug Davenport, the founder and executive director. He's going to talk about a little bit about Prospect SV. We're going to learn a little bit about institutional customers and their motivations. Next, we will move on to a panel discussion. We will have Christopher Payne from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Shawn Postera from Multnomah County, and we'll have Josh Peterman from Fehr and Peers talking about and trying to understand what it is that we need to learn and love about institutional customers. From there, we'll have a break, and then we'll hear from Vince Wong from Electric Fish and Nathan King from It's Electric. And then we'll bring all the speakers back together for a panel discussion. And then there we will call it a day. So Doug, I'm going to hand the mic off to you now. And it's all yours.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. And I believe that we also will be streaming this meeting on LinkedIn Live. So I'm just really appreciative of everybody that's been able to attend and that's checking in here. So just a little bit about Prospect Silicon Valley in case you are meeting us for the first time today. Prospect Silicon Valley is about really expanding the opportunity for innovation in important social sector markets and in opening up opportunities for those new innovations to make a bigger impact. So we're here to expand the conversation about innovative technology. We've done this in many ways, including areas like decarbonization, autonomy, areas in expanding the impact of technology in small buildings and traffic systems and otherwise. And we've done this in a way that has really helped link together and build collaboration amongst a set of leaders that really need each other to move forward. So we've worked in the public sector for many years, working with dozens and dozens of local governments in the state of California and others. And we've also worked to create collaborations between them in pilots. Our ecosystem is broad, and we really encourage you to get involved with us. We have worked in our past and present with startups, local industry partners from telecom, automotive, and many other sectors, energy sectors. Local governments, universities, and national laboratories that we work with on a routine basis, as well as even some of the trade organizations that represent the building of these sectors. Getting involved with us is really kind of aligning with our impact, and you just hit that space bar one more time. So we've worked with over 100 communities at this point, both in the bringing forward of innovative technology and actually also the early acquisition of innovative technology. We're actively today working with lots of institutions that are implementing fleet electrification programs and building decarbonization programs. Two areas that we think are especially important if we're talking about the kind of goals that we're setting for our future. We've worked with over 60 startups, and we're beginning a cohort-based program that will be amplifying that number significantly in the future. And as a result of the work that we've done, we've leveraged more than $600 million in investment from VC out to project capital in making these innovations happen. Working with us means that you're really aligning with our vision for the future and joining our mission to make these things happen, and making you a very visible part of what we do. So if you're a corporate wanting to work with us, we do have a platform for really building your presence and your leadership in this space. Being just part of our network means that you have an opportunity to take your aspirations and really work with us on how you can bring that forward. And so we're very excited about what we're doing, and we're excited to have you here. Just a note, we're always looking for great startups. Our partners are always looking for new connections and new opportunities to meet startups. We do offer, a number of ways, including, a couple of guests we have this morning to, get involved with what we do, get involved with us on a project level, get involved with our networking, and make contact with us. And we will work with you on investors and work with you on new potential corporate partners. So if you're interested, if you're on this broadcast and you're interested in getting to know more about our program, you can get in touch with Taylor. He's been kind enough to offer his email address. My apologies to your inbox, Taylor. But you could also look at our website, prospectsv.org, which I'm sure we'll be sharing in the chat more than once today, and just look at what our programs offer. And we'll be looking forward to getting in touch with you. I'm very excited to tell you that this is the last, and after this long, it's incredible to be saying this, but this will be our last fully virtual networking meeting. Our next meeting will be available online, but we're going to be doing it, and you should show up. We're going to be doing it live. We're going to be doing it in person at the Merck campus in North San Jose. There'll be more information coming out about this. It'll be another path to market discussion, but we're going to be talking about a very simple, non-vague, very straightforward, completely uncomplicated concept called decarbonization. I don't know how we're going to fill 2 hours talking about such an easy topic, but I'm sure we're going to do just a fine job. No, honestly, it is the future. Decarbonization is the future, but it is incredibly difficult and incredibly complicated. We are talking about undoing well over a century of history on energy supply and demand and moving it toward a low to zero carbon future. And we're excited to have this discussion. We're going to be talking about the ways that various forms of this effort are going to be affecting each other, and we're going to have a great time. We're going to be looking forward to seeing you in person in North San Jose, and look forward to some more announcements about that. So we're going to very quickly move to why we're here. So institutional customers, not exactly the thing that people consider a great opener for a startup pitch, but it's a market you cannot ignore. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to be introducing my colleague, Joe Fullerton, who's, well, let's put it this way. If you're going to have a conversation like this, it's good to have a ringer. Joe has worked in the institutional sector for many, many years, and as a leader in driving sustainability programs, has a lot of insight about how this works. But what I'm going to talk about is the big picture. We've worked with lots of local governments. We've worked with lots of universities and public institutions, and we've seen a couple of things. One, when you look at the numbers en masse, the purchasing power is absolutely tremendous. We're talking about electrifying fleets in the state of California. When you look at the state market, the local government market, schools and academic institutions such as universities, and then transit, we are talking about massive numbers, well over 500,000 vehicles. If you include what is known as white fleet, which are general service vehicles and administrative vehicles and otherwise, that number can easily approach 7 figures. So we're talking about massive spend. If we are truly talking about shifting all of those vehicles which have been internal combustion to this date and shift them toward all fully electric vehicles, the charging infrastructure and the power infrastructure alone runs into the well into the double-digit billion dollars in spend. And we're putting timelines on these things of the next 10 to 15 years. So this is a market that you should be paying attention to, and it is certainly going to be driving a lot of volume across the country. With the kind of investments that we're seeing today by the federal government in moving this forward, this is a tailwind that you really should be paying attention to. Buildings, the interesting thing about buildings is that after we build them, we don't always count them. So it's really hard to get a really strong inventory on buildings in the country or in the state. But when we're talking about the local government sector, from what we know, state of California, I looked up the state of California facility list. It's 2,511 pages long. Okay, and that's just the state facilities. We're talking courthouses and office buildings and other kinds of facilities. It's well over 36,000 buildings that are owned and managed by the state of California alone. The GSA is 350 million square feet of facilities at the federal level. Local governments, we have 550 local governments, each owning and managing buildings that can run from a few up to the many dozens of buildings. Academic institutions in the state of California comprise 150 separate campuses between University of California, CSU, and the community college campuses. Each of them have their share of buildings. And healthcare facilities that are run by the public sector comprise well over 200 outpatient facilities. So we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of square feet of buildings that today run on a combination of electricity and natural gas. And there is a nascent market for decarbonizing these buildings by shifting things from natural gas to electric. That involves a step-by-step conversion of space heating, water heating, and other sources of natural gas into electric. That is, as you're going to be hearing in a moment, really, meeting a process that is not really designed for revolutionary change for very good reasons. And so, when we look at this market, what we see is something that has vast potential. It has great need for innovation. It needs technology and solutions that can really handle scale. But with a process that can be difficult to navigate. So that's why we're here. And you should love institutional customers because they can be one of your biggest drivers of credibility, of impact, and truly can be a major driver of your growth. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Joe. Joe's going to talk a little bit more about the personality of institutional customers and why we should be paying attention to them. And then we'll get to our panel. Joe?
Yeah, good morning, all. Thanks for being here and spending your time with us. Really appreciate having you all here. I'm Joe Fullerton. I'm the Director of Energy and Sustainability Programs at Prospect SV. Prior to coming here, I worked in public institutions, local government, as well as community college system for 12 years. And I was one of the people responsible for initiating and implementing change processes within those complex organizations. Just for a moment, I want you to think about what's one word that comes to mind when you think about working with a public institution or a local government. Just think about that word really quickly. My guess is maybe the words innovative, maybe the words entrepreneurial, maybe the words forward thinking and acting. Maybe those weren't the first words that came to mind. Often in my experience working in public institutions, folks approached us with solutions or technologies with the mindset that our organizations were behind, that we weren't able to think creatively, and that we weren't able to act quickly. And while there are challenges to doing those things, there are significant opportunities, and the right person, the right types of organizations with the right types of decision-making processes can actually move the ball forward and innovate quickly in public institutions. I've seen everything from small pilot projects be successful to large-scale capital planning processes that go on for 5, 6, 7 years. And all because of not only technology innovations, but process innovations and solutions that startups and other corporations bring to the table in collaboration with and partnership with public institutions. So I'm really hopeful and I'm really excited about the opportunity to help other public institutions initiate those changes, implement those projects, and bring the power, the entrepreneurial attitude, the perspective of solutionaries like yourselves to the table to really address the climate crisis and other sustainability issues we have. I think if you really reflect upon the actions and the activities that local governments and institutes of education especially have made over the last 30 years, you'll see that those are actually the leaders in addressing the climate crisis. Those are actually the leaders in addressing social equity issues. Those are actually the leaders in affecting change in our broader system, making sure that not only the basic services that are supplied to our communities, but they're actually pushing the ball forward in terms of decarbonization, optimizing their systems, electrifying their systems, decarbonizing their systems. And that's true for fleet as it is for buildings. And so I just want to invite you all to think about these public institutions, large and small, as innovation centers, as opportunities to prove cases, to model and create innovative solutions and propagate them. One of the really cool things about public institutions is that they're highly connected. While there are so many of them and it's a lot of square footage and a lot of space, precedence matters. And once a project is done and once a proof of concept is established, it's, I won't say easy, but it's certainly attainable to replicate that project or replicate that effort or move that innovation through multiple organizations, following similar processes, connecting with the tight network of people that are in those local governments and public institutions. These folks have tight relationships, they have similar contracting processes, they have similar responsibilities. They don't always have the same access to resources. They don't always have the same access to information. But that's where the private sector can really play a big part in dislodging some of those stuck parts within an organization, helping them move forward on their electronic procurement system to make sure that everything that organization purchases has some type of sustainability attribute, or transitioning a fleet and thinking not only about the technology that's applied there in terms of the electric vehicle and the charging station and integration thereof, but also about the processes that need to change. Everything from the workforce and the training and the things that they need to ensure proper maintenance of those vehicles and charging stations, to the contracts and the services agreements that come into play with that new hardware software interface for those types of systems. So again, I think that in my experience, public institutions have this really important role to play. They have played this important role in terms of addressing the climate crisis and thinking forward and innovating for sustainability, but they're not always given that credit. And I want to invite you all to give them that credit and to bring your solutions and your creativity in partnership with those institutions. And that's, I think, where the relationship and that love of institutional customers really comes into play, right? It's a give and a take, and it's a fair trade of information and resources.
Great. Joe, thank you for that. There's certainly something to be said. Is as exciting as it can be to sell something quickly at a in a grocery store parking lot or something else. There's something to be said for having a thoughtful, methodical client that is focused on the next decade. not just the next quarter. And I think that it's certainly an important part of responsible growth for any company that's wanting to actually be in this sector. So thanks for those comments and thanks for what you've done. I'm going to introduce our panel. I think, Taylor, we've got a quick slide here. So I am grateful to know and grateful to have here three guests of ours that are going to speak with you about institutional procurement. We're going to talk about what it's like to drive some of these changes in the public sector. We're going to talk about what it's like to work from the inside in the public sector to start to move toward new solutions. For example, what startups are bringing to the table and what technology companies are bringing to the table, but also what it's like to work with this sector. And so I'm very happy to introduce to you Shawn Postera, who leads sustainable purchasing at Multnomah County, and Christopher Payne, who's been a driver in sustainable procurement systems and implementation and leadership across the federal sector, working with the U.S. Department of Energy and the GSA. And then Mr. Josh Peterman, who's a principal and co-owner and leader at Fehr and Peers, the consulting and engineering company. So these three folks represent, and we can bring them on here. These three folks represent different aspects of this issue. They're not each going to tell you why you should love institutional customers, but they're gonna certainly talk a bit about what it means to work from the inside and work from just from the aspect of making your presence felt with this kind of institution. So with that, I'm going to start with Chris Payne. So good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Doug. Thanks for having me today.
Yes.
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is how to spur innovation in large institutions. So it's great to be part of this panel.
Great. So, Chris, I thought maybe you could share a bit of your thoughts. You've done a tremendous amount of this work at the federal level, and I know you and I and our team under Empower Procurement, we've worked with the University of California system and many other groups. I think the first thing, if you wouldn't mind a little bit of framing, what's it like in the purchasing spectrum and in the innovation spectrum with these major institutions?
Right. Yeah. Well, as a scientist at LBL, I spend a lot of time thinking about how to move innovative technologies into market. And as you mentioned, I've done a lot of work with the U.S. federal government, one of the largest organizations on the planet. And I think one of the things that's important to think about, or at least one of the things I think are important to think about, is what makes large organizations unusual. And I think one of the key components to that is understanding large organizations as systems that involve three things. First, a set of roles. People within an organization wear particular hats. And so the kinds of things they do are structured by where they sit in the organization. And so people who are in a procurement role in an organization have a very specific set of responsibilities related to purchasing. People who are in a facilities management role have a very specific set of responsibilities related to making sure that their facilities operate properly. And that can include choosing the products that they ask the procurement people to buy, et cetera. So when thinking about large organizations, thinking about the multitude of roles that are within the organization is one aspect that's really important to think about when we think about how they bring innovation into the organization.
Right.
The second thing I'd like to think about is the idea of rules. Organizations have very strong policy structures in place, right? People are guided in what they do within the organization through both formal rules that apply, for example, in the federal sector, the federal acquisition regulations that guide how things are purchased, and informal rules, ways of doing business that guide how people within that organization behave, right? And so understanding those rules of the road and understanding how innovation either fits within or runs into those rules can be really important. And finally, the idea of tools, the business procedures, the physical systems that are used to operate organizations also structure the way that organizations behave and the kinds of inputs and outputs that an organization can have. And so if we think about things like electronic procurement systems, or even more generically, the training that people receive when they're onboarded into a large organization, that training, those systems shape how they think about what they can buy as members of this organization. And so that trio of roles, rules, and tools is really important to understand when you're thinking about how to sell into an organization.
So, thankfully, the state organizations, the local government organizations, the universities, the healthcare system, the school districts, they all operate by exactly the same rules, and they all have exactly the same organizational structures, and they all use exactly the same way to buy things.
Not exactly, but I think they all, I think if you approach this idea that all organizations have these functions of roles, rules, and tools,
right,
it can help you as somebody selling into those organizations to understand your customer better. And if you understand your customer better, you're more likely to make a sale.
Right. So just a quick before I move on to Shawn for some comments. When you think about this, and I know you've been looking, at how these organizations communicate, how these organizations make purchasing decisions, how these organizations drive information to the person who's making the decision. What advice would you give? Maybe just a couple of points of advice you would give to a company that's looking to move into this sector or has a really strong solution they'd like to really see considered. What advice would you offer in terms of how to approach that, or what are the things that you feel would be the most valuable to the end customer?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Doug, and an important one. I think one of the things that comes immediately to mind is the idea that organizations, sort of by definition, are organized to achieve a particular objective, right? They have missions. As the federal government, our mission is to, run the United States, as it were. Academic institutions have a mission to educate their students, et cetera. And so I think as sellers, particularly sellers of innovative technologies, we often forget to think about what the organizational mission is of the companies to whom we're trying to sell, right? And I think making that linkage between the innovative technology that we may have to offer and what the organization is trying to achieve can be a really strong connecting point that allows innovation to come into the organization, right? So as a seller, if you can make that link to say, this will help your organization achieve its objectives this way, that can be really effective and powerful.
Yeah, and that can run from, hey, look, the spend you're about to make on smart traffic signals, or the spend you're about to make on a set of charging infrastructure can help you reduce your hit certain metrics on safety, or hit certain metrics on carbon reduction, et cetera. But it also can come down to just making sure that the information on your product is available on a purchasing platform. Do you want to talk just really quick about electronic procurement systems and work you're doing there? Because that really does help Shawn.
Yeah, well, thanks, Doug. Yes, so, I mentioned the idea of roles, rules, and tools. And one of the things that has become more and more embedded in large organizations are these electronic systems that allow organizations to make products available within the organization. And, those are the mechanisms that bring outside supplies into the organization, right? Those electronic systems carry a lot of weight in what can be brought into the organization. And so thinking about how you make your products available within those electronic purchasing systems so that the organization itself can actually acquire them is really important. And so things like preferred vendor lists, things like making the environmental attributes of products clearly available if you're selling into an organization that has sustainable acquisition mandates, for example. Those kinds of making the data about your product as a seller readily available to your buyers' systems so that they can click the button and choose your product within their system is a really important mechanism to smooth purchasing.
Right. And you need to make sure that that information is relevant and it's credible, right? I love the story you tell about the product you found on a purchasing platform, the paper towels. Please just tell your paper towel story.
Yeah, so, I think one important aspect is, as you said, accuracy and credibility, right? And so vendors play an important role in making that information available to those organizational buyers. Those organizational buyers then have to rely on that data. And if they can't rely on that data, they become skeptical buyers, and they won't buy things they don't recognize, right? And so an example of that, as you alluded, Doug, is a large institution with whom I work had a very strong interest in sustainable acquisition. And we said, that's great, we'd love to work with you to help implement that. What are you doing in terms of some of these labeling programs like BioPreferred or Energy Star or EP? And they said, oh yeah, we built that into our system. It's great. We can look it up and, get those products. I said, great, can you show me an example of that? And as I was looking over their shoulder, they said, search on Energy Star products in their electronic procurement system. And the first thing that came up was Energy Star paper towels. Obviously, Energy Star doesn't label paper towels. The problem was that the vendor had indicated that every product they offered was Energy Star labeled, and therefore the data in the system got fouled. As a result, nobody would trust the labeling from that vendor going forward, and the sales to that vendor went down, right? So making sure that the information that you're providing into those systems is accurate really matters in making sure that you can not only make your first sale, but the continuing sales over time to that institution.
I love that story, Energy Star paper towels. So align with mission, make sure your value is known, and don't BS.
I'd say that's a pretty good summary, yes.
3 nuggets of wisdom you shouldn't have to be told, but we have to tell everyone. And really appreciate that. So good morning, Shawn Postera, Multnomah County.
Good morning. I am happy to be here, and I'm happy to connect with all of you. And I do want to reiterate that I think that's one of the important things you can do, which is connect with government and connect with us before we go to bid or before we go out for proposal. And there's many ways to do that. I mean, number one, just go to our websites. We have staff listings, and someone like me, I'm listed there. And don't be afraid to give someone a call or an email saying, I have a product, I have a service, and I don't know how to connect with your organization. Because what government procurement offices do is they have meetings with different division staff all of the time, and we can help connect you with the people that are going to be purchasing these items. And they know what they're looking for more than procurement staff oftentimes. The procurement staff looks to a department staff for specifications, looks to find what they're really looking for in their need. And they're specialists in it, especially like with vehicles and fleet and any electricity. We're going to facilities and saying, well, what do you want? What do you need? And so really not being afraid to just give us, any one of us, a call. And I say that because we believe in transparency. All government procurement agencies want transparency. They believe that that's the most ethical thing to do. So know that it is okay to do that outreach. And another piece is we do a lot of trade shows, and going to those trade shows can be really, really important because we're there to learn about what's going on. We don't know oftentimes until we get out there and start doing the research. And when you hear about pilot programs or requests for information, don't be afraid to complete those, because that's what we're looking at for our research and our market research. And we really do like co-ops. If you ever hear that term co-op, and I'll just briefly describe it. And if a co-op is written really well, it has great sustainability and brings better value. And also it means that other government jurisdictions can easily sign on to those contracts. So we like co-ops when they're written well. I also just wanted to bring up that we have these e-procurement systems, and we've spent a lot of time developing them, and they all have supplier portals. And in our supplier portal, that is, if you register in there, that's a great place to put all of your information and bring up what you are. And we do research oftentimes from there. And it is the one-stop shop for a lot of our jurisdictions, including ours. So if someone wants to buy EV technology right now, the best practice is to go into the portal and do research and see how people have registered in there, see what's in there. There's a lot of space for descriptions of what businesses do, how they do it. They can upload different documents on products and their services. And in there, once you've registered, that's where we do all this research, and we try to connect with you. So you might be hearing from one of us when we're starting to try to purchase something. And that's really all I wanted to say on that. So don't be afraid to talk to us.
So yeah, I appreciate that. I guess I wanted to ask you a question, and I hope you'll think it's a fair question. Let's start with this. There's a reason that government agencies are often called overworked, right? It's because you are. Right, your work list could easily triple the time that you could possibly put into the job as a human being. Right, it can be really, really difficult. Right, fair. Okay, so
That's for everyone.
Yes, fair for everyone. And but the public sector has to be especially thoughtful about how they make their decisions. They have to be especially thoughtful about the goods they purchase and the technology they purchase, because not only does it have to be possibly repeated or amplified 100 times across an overall city, but it's going to be there a long time, and it has to support what you've already purchased. And you can't change, you can't turn on a dime. And so when you talk about, hey, we've been buying gasoline vehicles and for forever, and we're really good at that, but now we're going to change to electric vehicles, and by the way we charge them is going to be an unknown, and the way we maintain them is going to be an unknown, and gee, how we use them might be an unknown. So when that kind of thing happens, and that's what innovation is, right? The bold statements about innovations, you're constantly breaking down your own constructs for where the future is. It ain't so easy when you're really responsible for doing it. And it doesn't feel so good when you are, the thing that's getting broken down. So my question to you is, what's it like as a sustainable purchasing leader working from the inside when you're going through a change like that? And what should a company that's looking to sell to you understand about what that, what that experience is from the inside?
I think what you need to know is we have a lot of staff that need some comfort and that we can build a contract together that's flexible and responsive over time, that you are the experts in, and you can tell us what the targets should be and what the obligations should be. And if you want an example of that, we do have current contracts for like clean diesel. So we've worked with different contractors and said, like, at $50,000 of spend, we're going to start to put into place a plan for more clean diesel on your fleet. So we're looking for specifications like that we can build into a contract, and making it, we don't know your business line, unfortunately, a lot of times. We just know what we've done in our market research, but what is going to be a flexible and responsive but sustainable obligation during the contract stage. That's what we're looking to hear. And having a good plan for that, and having a constant communication with check-ins, and that this is going to be transparent, that this is going to be ethical, that this is going to be fulfilling our needs and sustainable. Does that make sense?
No, it really does. And what I'm trying to give our audience here is a sense of, this isn't just theory and the idea that you're going to shift from, hey, we've been purchasing this to purchasing that. It creates a tremendous amount of internal friction, and they need the seller community as a partner. And it's really important.
Yes.
So that's great. So we're going to be running just a couple of minutes over. I'm just warning Taylor and Carolyn of our team. We're going to be running a couple of minutes over in this session, but we'll make it up in the group discussion later after we hear from our startups. Josh Peterman, Fehr Peers.
Good morning.
Good
Can you
morning.
hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great, and you look like Madonna. So what can I say? No, great to hear from you, and thank you for being here. Josh is joining us from Texas, but Josh was in California for quite some time with the firm of Fehr Peers, and I'll just say up front so that it's clear to everyone. Your expertise is actually in transportation and traffic systems, not in electric vehicle charging, not in buildings. But the same rules apply, right? And the reason I wanted to have you on this panel, and I'm so appreciative you made the time, is because you represent someone who has not only worked with the local government sector as just part of your practice, but you've assisted them in what they're doing as a partner, and you've seen the ways that a good idea has fallen because of some tactical mistakes. So we're going to gossip a little bit. All the names will be changed to protect the innocent or guilty, but would really like to hear from you on, maybe first, what's your take on working with institutional customers and what you see in terms of, the kind of impact they have, and two, maybe tell a couple of stories about where you've seen, really good ideas in this space fall by the wayside because of just some simple mistakes. What would you offer?
I'm happy to. For us, we're a consulting firm. We sell services, and so we of course love our institutional customers because they improve the communities that we work in, and that is our ethos. The other thing that is probably worth saying here for people who want to diversify your customer base, public institutions tend to be less susceptible to big market swings. And we're not talking a lot about revenue streams on this, but it occurred to me, since the topic of this is loving your institutional customers, you could have a housing market bubble or bust, or a tech boom or bust. And generally speaking, the city budget is still intact, for the next 2 or 3 years. So it helps for people on this call that are looking at their own revenue streams. When it includes institutions, your revenue can be like this instead of like a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So I think one of the important things, and I'm at sort of a trade show right now, Shawn was talking about that, for people to remember, Chris had talked about roles, and it's important to know the roles of the people in different departments at an institution. It's also important to understand which people are going to be involved in every aspect of the service or piece of equipment or whatever it is, whether it's, and I have done electric vehicle charging design, so I have dabbled in EV, in the EV space, but what people are going to be involved, not just in the procurement or in the decision, but what happens downstream of that. So once a thing or a service or a piece of software gets installed in a jurisdiction, somebody is going to have to operate that, be trained on it. After a year or two, there's going to be some sort of an update or something's going to break. Who is going to maintain it? It is critical, especially in our space where we're talking about public infrastructure, to think long and hard about that and develop relationships with those roles at a public institution if you want your service to succeed. And so many times in my space, I've been doing this now for a little over 20 years. If there is a company or a product that has made a bad name for itself, it's not because they came in necessarily and sold vaporware or sold something that didn't work. It's usually because they sold something that worked and then disappeared. You know, the customer called a year later because something broke down or they couldn't access it anymore. And, you know, the person had sold the product and moved on. So especially in the public realm, making or servicing your product or providing care to your customer after the sale, you know, when everybody's so excited, is almost more important than that initial sale, you know, which gets everybody excited. So that's one important little nugget that I've learned with, of course, with our services, but I'm talking more about the people that are trying to sell innovative products or services to institutions.
Great. So you just covered a lot. So as a firm, your advice is, look, this market is actually very important. We talk about responsible growth. This is a market that is not as subject to bubbles, not as subject to boom and bust. I introduced this session talking about the massive volume, but the incredibly distributed nature of this. How do you, as a firm, Fehr and Pearce, you're offering engineering services and advisory services, how do you connect with that really highly distributed customer? They're all over the place. Is this all just shoe leather and shaking hands, or what's your best advice for a company looking to make as broad an impression and broad a connection as possible in this space?
It's a good question, and one that is very appropriate. As Doug mentioned, I'm a shareholder in our firm, and my job right now as the Dallas office leader, this is a new market for us. So I'm coming in and trying to sell a relatively new service for an established firm, but in a completely new market. And I would say the first piece of advice is to go in expecting to be patient. We talk a lot about, or you'll read stories, you know, marketing books, and they'll talk about hunting. For us, it's not hunting, it's kind of farming. It's trying to plant seeds, developing relationships with people. I don't think I'm telling a company secret here. When we go into a new market, we're not really expecting to be profitable for maybe 3 years. We're going to be investing over that time, making relationships with people, understanding, like we were talking about, what the roles are at different agencies or institutions, understanding who the decision makers are and whether they're likely to value the product or service that you have available, because not everybody will. Some people have different jobs and they say, I understand what you're selling because of the politics in our jurisdiction, or because of my job role, or the size of the city, or the nature of our transportation services. We may or may not be interested in what you're trying to sell. So you're learning during that time. The other way, of course, is to know that the result is not always because of a direct sale. And I hate to break this down into sales, all of it, like we're car salesmen over here, but it's not always a direct sale to a customer. The partnering is the point I'm trying to make, is so important, because I sell a transportation service, and there may be some people that are looking to acquire transportation consultants, but there are also other agencies, and this goes to the rules that Chris was talking about. Some agencies don't have rules which allow them to contract directly with a transportation consultant for a service, but they do have an on-call for an architectural and engineering services, which covers 50 things that I don't do. So what do I have to do? I have to go find partners. I have to go find other agencies or other firms to team with that can provide all of those other things so that we can actually provide something that meets the needs of the customers. So patience and diversifying your, well, going and finding ways to partner. And then the third part is just having understanding who those roles are that are going to be important in making decision about your product or service
Right.
at the time and then downstream.
Great. So two quick questions, because number one, you're the person to answer it. Number two, this is really going to help our discussion after the break with two startups. So public institutions aren't always just making a purchase. Sometimes they're permitting something to happen, right?
Sure.
What can you say about these kind of approaches when it comes to building goodwill for things to be permitted?
Sure.
Just a couple of quick.
Yeah, so
Awesome.
and we've seen this all the time, and this is where the gossip comes in a when you are trying to sell, and we're really talking about a product now that goes within the public right of way. I work with jurisdictions, goes back again to roles. Somebody owns that right of way, somebody operates the stuff within the right of way, and somebody has to maintain it, and all of those have different rules. Maybe there is just a public works permit that has to be taken out. Maybe there's a local operational agreement that needs to be in place. Maybe there's a permit that needs to be obtained with the person that provides power. You're in California, so PG&E, they are probably part of the conversation. If you're near a railroad, the rail gets, so it the permitting process is never as simple as you think it should be when you're in the public sector. There are almost always more than one person involved in the decision, and it always takes way longer
Right.
than you think it will.
And completely unfair that I'm going to say this is a 30-second type question, because it's literally a 3-day question. How well do pilots help make emerging technology more viable with one institution, let alone the next 10?
Yeah. For a second, I thought you were talking about people that fly airplanes. I was like, I'm out of my element here. No, pilots can, yeah. Pilots have become very useful because it gives public a lot of it is about risk, controlling the amount of risk. And if you can identify a geographic area and some legal terms for an area and some responsibilities around innovative pilots, that is the way a lot of it, especially the bigger agencies, can allow for one-offs. Somebody wants to come introduce a new thing that the city hasn't tried before. There's a lot of risk associated with that, but having an innovation zone or some sort of unsolicited proposal rules within the city really allows those companies with those innovations that hadn't been tried before to give it a whirl without too much risk to the institution. So they are important.
Excellent. So thank you so much to all three of you, Chris, Shawn, Josh. It was a pleasure to hear your experiences and your kind of angle on this issue. We're going to be bringing you back after our break, after we hear from two startups that are working in this space, and hear their experience and hear their thoughts on the future in this regard. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. We're going to come back at 10:02. We did run a little long, as I promised, and we'll be making it up in the group discussion. So when we come back in 5 minutes, we're going to hear from Electric Fish and It's Electric, two really great startups that are thinking about this space. So I think everybody needs to mute themselves, and we'll be back at 10:02. Okay, by the sound of my voice, hopefully from across the room, you can rush back to your screens. We're going to be getting started in a moment. This is your 0-minute warning. We're about to get started again. And Taylor, just want to be sure. So one, thank you all for being here again. I do want to mention that we do have a number of folks who are joining us from LinkedIn Live. So this meeting and those that we do in the future, even the hybrid events, are going to be broadcast live on LinkedIn, as well as our Zoom here. I think we're going to be talking to next two startups that we are especially fond of. They're both working in the vehicle charging space, but in very different ways. We think that this is a really important market and one that's really indicative of what it means to partner with major institutions for your growth. I think we're going to be starting, Taylor, with Electric Fish. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. So let's show everybody Vince Wong from Electric Fish, just so you can all see him. Vince, welcome and thank you for being here. And we're looking forward to your presentation. So each of two startups, Electric Fish and It's Electric, are going to be making a presentation about themselves. And then we're going to be bringing our startups and our panel together for a group discussion. I'll just stay up front. If you have questions or you have comments, this is the time to load them into the Q&A. We're going to be working your questions and curiosities into our group discussion. So please, by all means, fire away. With that, Vince, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Doug, and Prospect Silicon Valley team. Really glad to hear that there'll also be some in-person events coming up. So look forward to hopefully meeting some of you there in person. But I'm Vince, one of the co-founders and the COO at Electric Fish. We build and deploy EV charging infrastructure that can help us not only unlock ubiquitous EV adoption, but also help the energy grid transition during this unprecedented time. We're a total team of around 9 folks, really passionate individuals, united around a common mission, but we are 4 co-founders as well, spanning very technical domain areas in EV, battery storage, hardware engineering, as well as energy optimization. And I think we all can agree that electrification is one of the key pathways to helping us decarbonize our society as quickly as possible. But electrification itself is not happening as quickly as it should. There's a number of very key infrastructure challenges which stand in the way. Firstly, we're dealing with an aging grid. In many parts of the country, the grid is 30 years old. In many other parts, it's nearing a century old. This antiquated grid infrastructure is not going to be enough to get us to the 100% adoption we're planning for in the next couple of decades. And with climate change getting worse as well, that's going to pose additional challenges for the reliability of our critical infrastructure. At the same time, site hosts are chomping at the bit to get EV charging infrastructure installed, but they're oftentimes frustrated. It might take a couple of years potentially, and potentially 6 figures in budget just to get their system installed. This is because they're needing to, first of all, wait in the queue with all the other electrification projects going on, buildings, EVs, industry. And then once it's actually their turn, they need to typically overhaul their entire site, which adds a lot of disruption and just headaches. And once the systems are actually installed, the path to ROI is not so clear-cut. Utilization is kind of highly variable, and peak demand charges are increasingly under scrutiny. And so we see a really massive opportunity to help usher in this new age of electrification, not only for EVs, but ultimately helping to rethink and collaborate with our utility partners in thinking through our energy infrastructure for the next few decades. And so we've taken a very systematic approach into designing a set of solutions that can address this major opportunity. The first is our plug and play hardware solution, which we call the 350 squared. It combines 350 kilowatt hours of lithium ion based battery storage with a 350 kilowatt DC fast charger. Its key to success here is that it leverages a unique and patented containerized design, which is able to plug and play with the existing electrical infrastructure at a site. So in this scenario, we're not needing to do the very onerous trenching and grid upgrades that are typically entailed. And it can help get both consumer and fleet applications up and running at very grid constrained sites in a matter of potentially weeks instead of years. Each of these systems is embedded with a distributed energy resource load balancing capability. And so basically what that means is when we're not charging EVs, we're able to maximize utilization of the system by serving other ancillary but complementary use cases, whether that's local backup power or demand management for the site or grid. And additionally, we've developed a unique intelligence tool called Community Resilience Score, which is basically designed for network planners and utility operators to think through how to actually, where you're actually going to put all this EV charging infrastructure. We're seeing a lot of charging being needed in places with aging grid infrastructure where the grid's only losing capacity. And so we need to think critically about how to balance power, supply, and demand. We also want to do so with the lens into energy equity to ensure that we're not leaving folks behind who've traditionally been left behind. To summarize the key benefits, we're able to bypass the traditional trenching and transformer upgrade process, saving potentially years and hundreds of thousands in installation costs alone. Our battery storage integration allows for lower OpEx for EVs as well as property operations. And the battery storage capability also allows us to effectively function as a microgrid, so we can help keep critical mission operations online even when the grid can't. And the containerization of the system also allows for easy deployability and redeployability to support with multiple use cases such as disaster relief. We had a really successful pilot with Los Angeles Department of Water and Power over the winter. Basically, we repurposed a 5 kilowatt single phase connection into a 350 kilowatt DC fast charging port. We did a max discharge of 261 kilowatts to a couple of light duty EVs. This whole process only took about 2 weeks, including planning and only 2 days of actual installation effort. And again, our key to success here was that we were able to work with the site's existing electrical. There was also zero peak load detected for the entire pilot. And we were able to decommission the site in about 3 minutes and using just a forklift and a flatbed, transport it back home overnight to the Bay Area. We've translated that success with LADWP with a number of other enterprise institutions, primarily in the utility space, but also now getting recognition from OEMs, as well as from school bus fleets who work with school districts to rapidly electrify those communities. I've got images on the right of some of our upcoming products, and I'll just say that, while it wasn't the first obvious choice, we actually started our marketing plan focused on gas stations. Enterprise institutions actually were a very great fit because we had to learn the right way rather than the hard way, what all the key requirements were to ensure a safe and effective and valuable solution. Entities like utilities also hold the key to electrification in their service territory, so they make for a very natural channel partner beyond these pilots. And additionally, as we think about having an impact on metrics like decarbonization, resilience, and equity, we look highly to public entities and municipalities and state agencies who are on the forefront of leading this change. And they've been very transparent and collaborative in working with early stage startups like us in affecting this change. And so we've seen a multiplier effect in engaging in a number of these institutions to help us ultimately achieve the impact that we want to. And so just to wrap on this slide, we believe that we can really make a big impact around decarbonization, not just from providing more accessible infrastructure that can incentivize electrification, but with our battery storage integration, we're able to help make the grid greener. As I alluded to, these are basically microgrid integrated EV chargers that are future-proofed. And so as we look ahead to the future, the grid's not getting any younger. and the challenges are only becoming steeper. And so the centralized infrastructure is going to need decentralized resources that can help aid in this transition. And we believe that our distributed network of storage integrated charging can play a big role in doing so. And then, around equity, we often see that the communities that go out first come back online last. And we want to help play a role with our digital and physical products in helping to strengthen energy security in these traditionally underinvested communities. And so with that, I'm Vince Wong, happy to take any questions, and my emails will sit at the bottom. I think that's 8 minutes on the dot.
Excellent, and I appreciate that. Not just for your timeliness, which I am guilty of never following, but also that's great. And we're gonna pick you back up in the group discussion to talk about your experience going from basically a consumer market facing type of strategy to moving to this institutional strategy. And congrats for all of your success there. So we're also happy to have Nathan King, who is with a startup called It's Electric. I think this is especially interesting because I am like a whole lot of people. I own a home and I do not have a driveway. It's more often than not that vehicle charging isn't that idyllic, oh, I'm just going to park in my garage and there's a charger right there and it's lovely. There's a lot of people that need to be looking at other forms of getting their car charged, and going and doing the car charging vending machine is not going to be always smart. So Nathan's taken a big hard swipe at this, and we're really excited about what It's Electric is doing. So with that, Nathan, tell us what I'm talking about.
Yeah, hi, Doug, and hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having us on and letting us share more about what we're doing here at It's Electric. I think I'm just rewinding here. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. In a lot of ways, the problems that Vince is trying to solve are actually very similar. Right? It's one of the things that I think that there are a lot of startups right now that are trying to actually solve what are really big gaps in EV charging infrastructure, with a particular emphasis on cities. I think cities have been overlooked in EV charging infrastructure. And for us, it's a big missed opportunity. We estimate that there are about 40 million drivers who rely on street parking for their daily charging need, daily parking needs. And without convenient, affordable charging, these drivers aren't going to switch over from gas to electric. So of course, that means we're delaying progress that we need to decarbonize our roadways, remove pollution from our city streets. I actually started this company after working as an architect for a couple of decades here in New York City. Similarly, my co-founder was in public-facing technology. So we're both kind of coming at this sort of, let's say, mid-career, but with actually, which is relevant to this discussion, with actually a lot of experience working with institutional clients. I design mostly hospitals and laboratories, and also, working with city agencies and procurement. So these are things that we sort of well understand, and we've actually tried to build into the DNA of It's Electric. Doug, you laid out yourself as an ideal It's Electric customer, right? Like cities like San Francisco, cities like Brooklyn, where It's Electric is based. That's where we see this really critical need for EV charging infrastructure. And sort of as I was saying before, we don't see much interest in it from the existing EV charging industry. There's a focus on regional transportation corridors. There's a focus on deploying in commercial lots and garages in suburban communities, but nobody has really stepped up to the plate and said, hey, here is how we're going to solve EV charging infrastructure for cities. And some of the barriers that Vince laid out are also kind of the barriers that we see as a primary inhibition to EV charging infrastructure in cities. It's not an accident that softer targets, let's call them, in regions outside of cities were targeted first by the big OEMs. There are complexities around working in cities. Certainly the decaying grid, electrical grid is one of them, but also we see problems around design. We need to have a specific charging hardware that's suited for curbside use. And also we do need to reduce that sort of time and cost component of publicly accessible charging. Our vision of the future and what we believe is ultimately going to be inevitable is cities will begin to deploy networks of lower voltage or level 2 curbside chargers. This is obviously a big investment in urban infrastructure. So what we've done at Its Electric is try to figure out how to make deployment as frictionless as possible. How can we get as many charging points in the ground as possible in the shortest amount of time? And so our approach is based on how we power these publicly accessible chargers. Rather than going out and connecting to the grid, what we're doing instead is connecting to the adjacent private properties' existing electrical supply. And finding that electrical supply to power a publicly accessible charger that anybody can use. This is obviously has huge advantages in terms of reducing the time and cost it takes to install one of these chargers. I think, again, very similar to Electric Fish's approach, is that we are also a behind the meter approach. We are finding that electrical capacity where it exists. So we avoid needing to make service interconnection agreements with the utilities. We're just really taking advantage of underutilized capacity that's already existing at that location. The other thing it does for us is it builds community participation in the deployment of EV charging in these communities. Because what we do once we're connected to that host property's electrical supply is we share revenue from that charger with the host property. This really builds excitement and advocacy, and it also keeps us honest. It makes sure that we are deploying in neighborhoods where we will not only see demand from drivers, but acceptance of EV charging in their communities from people that own properties in these neighborhoods. We do this installation at no cost to the property owner. We are going to finance the installation costs with public incentives through different incentive programs and grants from utilities and states. So always interested in having those grant opportunities coming down from municipal and state agencies, as well as the funding that's being delivered through the Infrastructure and Act and the IRA. But also, we think we can find a financial model that actually works. By keeping our CapEx, by keeping our equipment costs down to a minimum, we can actually pencil out the finances around these charger installations without actually any public investment. And so that's something that we think is ultimately going to be very important when we're talking to municipalities. They don't want to see this as a long-term solution, subsidizing basically our deployment of this charging infrastructure. What we can offer them is actually a sustainable and privately funded model. The fact that we can be more flexible about where we locate, the fact that we have a focus on cities means that we can align the deployment of our networks where there are pre-existing public priorities. So as many of you know, the infrastructure money coming from the federal government, many state programs align to Justice 40 initiatives or prioritize low-income and disadvantaged communities. We sort of have that built in by default, but at the same time, we're also looking at neighborhoods, not just within the central business districts, but where we see communities that are underserved by public transportation. These drivers tend to use their car for their daily commute. And ultimately will put more miles on their car and need more charging. And so again, we've tried to build in an inherent sort of business case for deploying in disadvantaged communities, in addition to sort of the alignments with the publicly available financing. Our hardware is somewhat unique. What we have is ability actually to keep adapting the charging hardware so that it goes beyond just simply providing EV charging. What we can do once we have that power point out to that curbside is we can do other things that we know are also in the civic interest. So providing, let's say, a charge report for micromobility. You can imagine once we begin to have a distributed network of these charge points, it's very easy for us to adapt sort of different kinds of sensors or services that cities are already trying to provide. But because the competition around curbside is already very intense, we can be there with our PowerPoint and allow other kinds of functionality to be added into our technology. We see a huge amount of potential for growth. The anecdote that I like to tell is that here in my neighborhood in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, there's more and more electric vehicles on the road. We're seeing people throwing extension cords out their second floor window and draping them down trees to plug in their car. The demand for EVs is not just a high income suburban phenomenon. There's huge demand for these vehicles, and it will continue to grow, especially given the recent CARB decision in California that mandates the sale of battery electric vehicles by 2035. So we're reaching a critical point. I'm going to kind of skip ahead some of these slides. This is what our prototype hardware looks like right now. We have this currently deployed in Detroit, and we are working on our market-ready product at the same time that we are also doing an aggressive outreach campaign to different municipal partners, so we can launch pilots early to mid next year. So again, we are here to sort of identify not only what the problems are, but to provide a path of least resistance for municipal and institutional partners so they can quickly solve their EV charging infrastructure needs. Thank you.
All right. That's excellent. So not only in this discussion have we talked with folks about what it means to really address this sector and take this sector seriously, but we just heard from two people who are basically saying, you know what, whatever my day job was, who cares? This is something I'm going head forward and I'm going to do something about. And it's really cool. I'm always really pumped up when I talk to folks like you. So we're adding virtual chairs, tall stools to the virtual stage here. So everybody's going to kind of come up, and we're going to have that awkward where everybody figures out, oh, you're going to sit here. Okay, I'm going to sit here. And so I'm going to start with Vince and Nathan just for a moment. Before we open it up. Now, again, folks, if there are questions, comments, please put them into the Q&A. Don't make me do all the work, okay? I know you're curious. I know you have questions. Even if you disagree, just write something, okay? Thank you. So Nathan, Vince, Vince, I remember when you guys started, you said, we're going to put these in gas stations and we're going to make this the alternative to fueling up your car in a very familiar location. And we're going to really serve the consumer sector. And you've moved toward the institutional sector. Congratulations. And Nathan, you used to design buildings and you go, wait a minute, there's a solution here. Because you probably see what I see a lot, which is all these, kind of improvised charging at the curbside, which are either sometimes a combination of dangerous and stupid, but sometimes they're kind of clever, but it's not scalable. So I guess I want to start with both of you. Why did you move into this sector, and what are you thinking about when it comes to either institutions as a customer, or in the case of Nathan, you're constantly having to align with the needs and motivations and the programs of a public sector that's going to permit and partner with you on your implementation. So maybe Vince, maybe you can start with what led you to the change, and what are you thinking about most when it comes to this kind of customer?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It's definitely something that we wrestled with a lot early on. So we were founded about 2.5 years ago, and I would say it happened quite organically. So about for the first 1.5 years, we were very heads down on this, basically ripping and replacing fuel pumps at gas stations. And I think it's definitely a market that we're still very interested in addressing down the line. But the public can be quite unforgiving, or consumers rather. And so we wanted to be sure that by the time we got to the public sphere, that we were in a very robust and mature state. Not that institutionals don't care about that, but we were fortunate in that we had access to institutions that we were able to establish credibility with over a period of time, where they got to work and learn from us. And we had champions within those institutions. And so it made the process really enjoyable and a bit more seamless in that sense. And so, we were typically working with some of the innovation arms of some of these institutions. And, there's this expectation that, we're all learning in this together. There's, things that we're trying that might be first of their kind. And I think we've been, yeah, I just have to stress again, how fortunate we've been to engage with them. And some of them have been through, at least sales conversations introduced through Prospect Silicon Valley's team. So, through just organic discovery, we kind of landed on that. And then what we sort of just decided to own it at a certain point, that folks like utilities and municipalities are really, really great channel partners, and they understand the infrastructure, they understand the challenges. They're both enterprise, but they also serve people. So there's like that element as well. But yeah, we have really loved working with institutions. And Doug didn't pay me to say that.
Thank you for that clarification. Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me that as we talk about this, that we're talking about two different types of institutional partners. We're talking about our municipal agencies that we're talking to, and institutional partners like universities and hospitals and other sort of large property owners within cities. And those I think are two slightly different audiences, but they're both critical and crucial, at least from our perspective. Starting with just a really high level point about the municipal agencies, we don't look at needing to coordinate with civic priorities as being a barrier to growth. In fact, we see it as a way to ensure our growth. Working with a city agency it certainly requires some dedicated bandwidth, but it also allows you to sort of have the freedom to expand within that area. And so we actually, again, tried to build that into the basic idea of what we're doing. As an architect, getting permits for things is an everyday reality. And it's one of the things that I sort of enjoyed doing. I kind of became a bureaucracy nerd. There were technical problems to figure out when you're designing a building to make sure it doesn't fall down and people can get out. But there's also sort of technical problems around getting a permit through a Department of Buildings, or making sure that you have a streetscape improvement plan approved by the Department of Transportation. So these are sort of a set of skills that I sort of brought to It's Electric and sort of informed its thinking. But then just also, as we see other kinds of privately funded infrastructure problems being solved, one of our advisors is a co-founder of City Bike, different bike share programs around the country. And City Bike has been completely transformational in New York City. It's certainly changed my life for the better. So this sort of like privately funded solution to a public infrastructure problem, I see as having huge potential, and we sort of really thought about ourselves in that same way.
Excellent. So rest of our panel, Joe, Josh, Shawn, Chris, I'm about to call on you and ask you about your thoughts on what you've heard from these two startups as to their approach, coming from the perspectives that you brought to this discussion. So that's your fair warning, so you don't feel put on the spot. You are on a future spot. But I want to start with one quick question. It actually came from the audience. When you do think about progress, and let's kind of throw out the window some of the practical things, like, are we going to get investment and things like that? What do you think are practical limits to your growth or to your progress in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that first. So I think there's a number of things to think about. I think there's definitely a lot more education that can happen. I think people are now starting to understand electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging, but it's still a rather new concept for many. And I think helping folks understand, what that looks like today, it is a new paradigm for many, and what it could look like in the future, the things we should be planning for. That is, I think, something that probably affects our whole industry. For us specifically, we are at the commercial pilot phase, where we are, continuing to test different markets, work with different, institutions and different service territories. And so finding something that we're still nimble in that we are able to take in new design feedback and changes, but getting to that place where we've sort of locked the design, at least for first period, and we're able to work towards manufacturing. Manufacturing is something that in supply chain are topics that come up a lot. I think we've done a lot of work in trying to secure some of that supply chain, given how competitive it can be, especially in like the battery area. But I would say we're sort of thinking, in 2024, we've sort of locked in like the short term supply chain, but really getting to like unlocking the thousands level scale is something that's not trivial. I am hopeful, though, with all the new federal policy and funding, that there will be support, whether it's dilutive or non-dilutive, that can support in achieving those objectives. So that's one example for me.
I just want to comment. I think there's a big driving force for either grid independent or grid quasi independent charging systems, like you see, especially for fleets. I'll just mention a city that we work with who's truly struggling with this. They've become very good in this acquisition picture. They become very good at buying the cars, right? So the change from, hey, we're going to buy this car to that car wasn't that difficult. The system of getting the infrastructure purchased, getting the money for the infrastructure, and then getting it installed is becoming extremely problematic. And it's to the point where if they want to reach their goals for acquisition and not lose momentum in that purchasing, as we've talked about, institutional change means also consistency, right? That they're gonna, basically they're gonna blow the capacity of their buildings. They're not going to be able to continue to grid connect all of their systems to keep up with the pace that they can achieve with purchasing and replacing their vehicles. So, having these kinds of, battery boosted or grid, quasi disconnected type systems are going to be incredibly important. So the demand is there. It's as you said, it's navigating everything else that's going to matter. So Nathan, really quick, and I just, again, I appreciate, that you talked about the permitting process. You and your co-founder Tia, you're both coming from the design industry, where you understand, partnering with the public sector is part of getting a project done, no matter who's the owner, right? So, when you think about what's limiting your growth, you said what you don't think is a limiter. What do you think might be?
Yeah, this is becoming clear that right now there's just so many options out there to solve problems around EV charging that big institutional, I think one of the potential drawbacks with larger buyers is that when they make an investment, they make a big investment, and it's difficult to reverse a big deployment. And so I think we see a lot of hesitancy. People are not sure if one particular model of EV charging is going to be superior to another, and that makes sense, right? We are at the very, very beginning of this, and there's not a lot of data, and the data that's out there in many cases, some of the charging companies have been, let's say, somewhat less than successful in deploying publicly accessible charging, and so there's a lot of hesitancy that I think should be completely predictable and expected when any kind of new technology is developed. There's a period of time that people try different models before it becomes clear that a particular way of doing things is the most efficient and the most cost effective. So I think that sort of uncertainty will persist for the next couple of years, while EV charging does sort of begin to sort itself out, where different ways of operating begin to collect data that can be proven. My last thought here is that we actually expect to see some of the larger cities may have to signal to the rest of the region that they're going in one particular direction before we see other cities sort of follow on.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that, and we hope that the person who asked this question, got some great information from that. I appreciate your comments there. So everybody together, thank you again so much for being part of this discussion. So I promised our first panelist and my colleague Joe that I'd be asking, what's your take on what you heard? And do you have any comments or observations you'd like to offer? So this is open game. Please don't give me a heart attack and give me radio silence. Extrovert, go for it. Thoughts here?
Doug, one thing that I heard earlier that I'm interested in reflecting on a little bit more is the idea of pilots and the degree to which in a procurement context in large institutions, there can be mechanisms in place that allow big institutions to sort of play a bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
To try things out, to innovate. And I think it's important to recognize those opportunities for that kind of thing for a couple of reasons. One, I think, Josh, you mentioned the idea that there may be different procurement rules associated with those kinds of pilot entities. And so it may be a different way to be able to build that connection with the institution that is such an important component of that long-term strategy. And then the other thing that I'm thinking about in that context is the conversion from pilot to sort of status quo, right? And the move over time from using those unique authorities, using those small scale pilot opportunities to being the person who is the established relationship with the large institution and getting into the more standardized procurement process. And so if I were thinking about particularly a smaller scale startup kind of company who has an innovative product that they want to bring to an institutional customer, looking to those pilot opportunities as a way to begin that relationship that Josh mentioned, I think is really key over time.
Well, I'll just mention, actually, I'm going to ask Joe to jump in on this particular topic before other people jump in with their thoughts. I started Prospect Silicon Valley on pilots. There was a time that California was investing tremendous amounts of money in demonstrating new technology, and suddenly, almost silently, and in some ways, something happened in a back room where everybody goes, "No more pilots. Now we're going to implement," and we're not sure we learned enough from the pilots. Pilots happened, and we raised awareness, and some people, maybe learned a bit about how they could do it. But the natural transition from pilots into implementation can be very hard. And the reason I was just asking Joe to jump in is because Joe, in some ways, in your prior to joining us, you were working with a large number of community college districts that were looking at some of these transitions. And you and I first met when we were going to be working on a pilot it met a untimely demise thanks to lots of force majeure. But when you think of pilots from an implementation standpoint, how do you get from there's an idea and now people know about it to bring it into the daily kind of drumbeat of operations?
Yeah, it's really a big challenge and a big, there's like this Evel Knievel moment. And for those of you of my generation, or you may know of Evel Knievel. For those of you not quite there yet, use your search engine. Where you kind of have to commit to jumping the gap, right? You have to go for it. The pilot project may tell you some really valuable things. It may also really exhaust your organization, right? Like, I know as a sustainability manager in a complex organization for a number of years, there is decision fatigue, and there's really no such thing as a small project, right? Like, every project has a set of processes, a set of decisions, a set of conversations, a set of investments that need to be made. And so I think from an implementer standpoint, it's really important to recognize that. And then, from a to prove your project and to show that it's going to be valuable, you have to think beyond just the technology and extracting the data and saying, okay, here's how many kilowatts, or here's how many dollars, or here's how many, charging sessions, or whatever it is. You also have to go into the process changes. You have to think about, okay, so once we scale this up, what is that going to look like? Thinking about fleet electrification, for example, how do you both simultaneously optimize performance of the organization while providing this decarbonized solution? And there's a lot of really good overlap there, but that may mean that the maintenance technicians actually need to know a whole different set of skills. They may need a whole different set of tools. They may need a whole different workshop in order to do the work necessary at a larger scale. While in a pilot project, you can provide some of those resources at a larger scale. It's not a linear relationship in terms of the complexities. The complexities kind of multiply before the project. So I think there's that consideration. The other thing to recognize is that the pilot project in and of itself is called lots of different things, right? And some people get exhausted by the word pilot project, or some people get exhausted by the thought of trying something new. So proof of concept, test case study, whatever semantical difference you can provide to your audience to show that this is not just a one-off, small scale, extreme effort that they're going to have to go through for maybe not so much of a bang for the buck, but that has that larger opportunity, and they will be asked to kind of partner with you in the conversation around the success and or the failure of the pilot project is an important conversation to have early. I can think of a lot of times where folks have promised things. In one example, very briefly, we were doing exterior lighting project, high pressure sodium to LED. We wanted to wirelessly network it so we could control it better. And we were working with a small organization, venture funded, that was doing this new lighting system. We installed a small pilot. It worked pretty well. By the time we were ready to go to the market for an RFP, which was about a year and a half later, a request for proposal, that company had totally folded and failed. And we were now in this space of okay, we have these qualifications and these specifications and these things that we want to get. Now, who do we ask for them, right? So there is this risk in the pilot project and this relationship and this conversation that needs to be had early on around, hey, this may not work for a lot of different reasons, and not just because of the technical reasons. So I think pilot projects are great, and they're really important, and they're still very viable, but they do require a high level of sensitivity and kind of emotional intelligence and organizational intelligence to implement properly and to proliferate beyond the pilot.
So Vince, Nathan, what you're hearing is, the pilot might be an opportunity and you can do some cool things, but there's a whole lot going on beneath the waterline in terms of how that needs to align. Shawn, what's your thoughts?
My thoughts is that I agree with everything that has just been said. And oftentimes in pilots, what I've seen be very successful is onboarding more than one relationship and external partner. So having 3 or 4 companies that we work with on one pilot so that we can have continual services and we learn from each other, and having that open collaboration. And they might be in competition with each other for procurement in the future, but maybe not. Maybe it is better that we have 3 or 4 service providers at once for one type of good or service. Mm-hmm. So that's been very successful for us in having just continued services. And so if one supplier ends up not being able to provide services at the end of 18 months, at the end of a pilot, we still have another relationship that we can continue to develop.
And Shawn, I hope I asked this in the right way. You can, this is a question. You can do this with a clear upfront understanding that no specific purchasing decision is being made. This is truly a demonstration of performance capabilities to educate you on how you might approach, right?
Yes.
It's extremely important. So all the risk is on the people that are making the demonstration, but if they're going to show up to the game, they should be ready to play, right? That's part of that's life, right? So
Yes,
you
but it's
wouldn't
also-
necessarily eliminate them from future consideration, but they've certainly shown you some concern points that might be factored into a future procurement.
Correct.
Okay.
But it is also a time to show us what the difficulties are. I mean, don't be afraid to say, this is a pain point here, and we need to work this out. And here are the reasons why in the supply chain, this is going to be painful. and we don't have a solution for it yet.
Right. I think it's a really important point. Acquisition can be a little bit stark, right? I mean, I've been on both sides of this, and there are times when, I worked in emerging technology in the environmental sector before I was in energy, and we would see some really interesting solutions being brought forward in a qualifications based or a value based procurement, and sometimes you'd think that this is a really exciting idea, but the rules of the procurement preclude you from moving forward with them. And so, this idea of having this early stage time where it's okay to fail and it's okay to recognize we're all moving into a new system together, I think is really important. I'm glad that you're doing that. I know you did that somewhat when you kind of broke apart, one big system you worked with, and built a whole new set of relationships and capabilities that would allow you to grow better as Multnomah County, correct?
Correct. And I think one way we were able to do that is we didn't look at anything as a failure, but more as a lessons learned, and letting what we've learned guide us in the next decision point. So we don't abandon anything. We don't discard it and just put it in the trash pile. We're not going to deal with that company or that concept anymore. It's more what worked and what can we take forward in getting our goods and services to us.
Excellent. Thank you, Shawn. Josh, so, from personal experience, I know of at least 2 times that you have worked with startups with exciting ideas in the traffic space, both of which we're counting on you for some advice on how they could partner with a local government, what their process would be, how do they approach this idea, and how do they even get the equipment installed and operating in a demonstration scale partnership. I was wondering if maybe you can talk a little bit about pilots from your standpoint as both an engineer and somebody who has worked in between the innovator and the ultimate buyer.
Yeah, and I can talk about pilots. There was one kind of important point that I wanted to make, especially when I was listening to Nathan, and frankly, my brain exploded a little bit when I was listening to this, because it touched upon everything I was talking about earlier in terms of relationships and permitting and knowing the roles of people, because I'm not going to get into the weeds, but we've got one part of the agency that deals with connecting to private property, which is different from the agency that deals with the public works and the sidewalk and the street. We've got a transportation department that has a say over what happens to that parking space. There's ADA. There's all, the utility agency has different rates that they charge for electricity. You just walked into a spider web, and I know you know this. You've got some history with architecture. But if somebody were coming to me with that, like, oh my God, you're about to get tangled into this web of rubber bands, and you're not going to know what to do unless you've done your due diligence up ahead and you realize this is already a pain point for the agency, and you've got their commitment to do something about this issue that they have. So if you can go to a public works director or a city manager or a director of a DOT, and they say, yes, we have this problem, we're going to work with you to find a solution. If you can start with that, then the follow-on process is much easier, because rather than being rather than working against a different people and different rules, you're working with them that they can help you figure out a way to get through those rules. And that is something that you can do with a pilot, because it limits it just limits the extent to which a city, the size of the issue that your partner needs to tackle. So maybe it's a few, excuse me, a few apartments, or just one city block, something like that, in a pilot zone. The because I was making some keynotes when totally flipping, and then Doug, you can come back and ask me different questions. The one thing I got, Vince, that I thought was interesting, you just briefly showed it on your slide. Diversification is key. I was listening, and you're essentially selling a big box that holds energy, but I did notice that you also have a software platform, and you can sell that too. So it's different products for different people, that might hold different attractions for different clients, so it's I thought that was interesting.
Right. So, and thank you for that, Josh. So I guess I'm going to turn it around real quick, and our startups, and I have not warned you about this, I apologize, but do you have questions for our panel? You have an engineer, you have a buyer from the public sector, you have somebody who has basically helped the entire federal government change its approach to procurement with sustainability. It's a golden opportunity to ask these folks a question. I want to give you a chance to maybe ask the final few questions. And please don't tell me you're speechless, because you're both startups. I know it's impossible.
Yeah, I think it's following up a little bit on what Josh was saying. For us, the question, this is going to be kind of a generic question, but for us, the question we're always asking is, how do we get the attention of those key stakeholders in the city agencies that would be willing to advocate for us? Or how do we not only get their attention, but then try to bring them on our side? And what we kind of modulate back and forth between is, should we do a more of a grassroots campaign? Should we talk to people in the community and find support from people who live and work in the areas that we're looking to deploy a pilot? Or should we try to find people on the other side? Should we talk to local electeds? Should we talk to big community organizations? What do you see as the most effective strategy to sort of make those connections with the stakeholders? And I'll just end the question by saying, part of the reason that we're thinking about this too is we want to keep an open mind and be able to sort of shift and evolve our approach. So we're making sure that we're getting the feedback from the communities we purport to be interested in helping. Did that make sense as a question?
It did. It's a very good question, and maybe I can start, and then Chris and Shawn can riff on the same theme. But going back to what I was just saying, find the person who's feeling the most pain from the issue that you're trying to solve, because what you just said, I would say all of the above. Go to the city council that covers that district that is having the issue. Talk to the people in the community. Try to get a meeting with the development services person, because all of these people are involved in the decision. But who is the one that's most likely to be on the front line at the community meeting where people are, complaining about this, and start there.
I have something to say on that to support that. And I know right now who you can contact is John Stars. I put his contact information in the chat, and he's leading a statewide work group right now on trying to solve this problem of implementing EVs throughout the state of Oregon. And his mission is to gather enough specifications to go out and do a very large procurement that's going to be a co-op for all government jurisdictions, and somehow address all of the issues we've talked about today. Like, how do you develop charging stations throughout a community? How do you develop it statewide? How do we do it across state lines? Like that's his task, is to be able to provide specifications for procurement that they're going to onboard a lot of different suppliers for all the goods and services for EV. And then the state of Oregon is going to, of course, buy onto it, but they want all of the local jurisdictions to buy into it as well. And so that we would all be procuring from the same procurement, these goods and services. So I encourage you to contact him because he is very much struggling with this problem right now.
Shawn and Chris both, because Chris, you're looking at GSA and DOE. Do you think that the co-ops are going to move into things like fleet purchases and charging purchases and charging as a service type purchases and some of these, and even building decarbonization? Do you think they're going to move into that space?
I do. And the reason why I'm really interested in that is I want to be involved with those co-ops early on so we can build sustainability into it. Because when you sign onto a co-op, you don't change any information. You just sign on to whatever the original procurement and contracts were.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in supporting some of these co-ops because it can institutionalize sustainability across the board, because everyone would be signing on to the same contract.
Right. Sometimes those contracts don't align with an innovation type picture, as you already know, right? They could be,
Right.
Look, this has to be best value. This has to be lowest cost per unit. This has to be blah, blah, blah. It may not be, hey, there's a really messy world out there and we have to supply to it. But it's a really interesting challenge. Thanks for that. Chris, thoughts on this as well with group purchasing or co-ops or collaborative purchasing scale here?
Yeah, I think there are two things that are coming to my mind. One has to do with exactly what you said, the idea of group purchasing. I broaden that out a little bit, and I think about the idea of things like blanket procurement agreements or multiple award schedules where, frankly, there is a tsunami of funding coming out of Congress that is hitting, large institutional customers, right? And we're faced with a situation in which we're going to have to figure out new mechanisms to move through that funding. It's an enormous glut that we're trying to move quickly, right? And so in that context, having procurement vehicles that allow for the ready distribution of those funds to multiple parties becomes really important. And so as I'm thinking aloud a little bit here, but if I were a marketer of an innovative technology, one of the things that I would be looking for, I think right now in this context, would be partners with whom you could establish essentially seller co-ops and saying, look, you buy one of us, you buy all of us, and we can together provide this suite of goods and services. I think in the environment in which we're facing, that's going to be really attractive. So that's one of the first things that pops to my mind. The other thing that pops to my mind, I wanted to loop back on a little bit, which is, as technology developers and innovators, I mean, our primary thoughts are on innovation, invention, technology development. But when we're thinking about institutional customers, I think one of the things that any seller faces is the fact that they are a change agent for the buying institution, right? By definition, innovation involves the disruption of existing channels and the need to develop new ones. And so as a innovative technology provider, thinking about the change agent components of how you work with these institutional customers so that you can unify buyer and seller intent, I think is a really important part. And so as I think about the skills of these technology providers, thinking about themselves as change agents in addition to technology providers might be a useful approach.
That's excellent. It's 11 o'clock. I cannot tell you how cool this session was. for me. I'm sure, I really hope it is for all of our guests today, that not only do you get a chance to share something you feel passionately about, but you learn something. I'm really grateful to all of you, Joe, Shawn, Chris, Josh, and to Nathan, and to Vince, for you being here. For those who have attended, we hope that you really got something special out of this. We want you to stay with us through our contact, our newsletter, our peer forums and future events. We're very excited about this topic and where we're headed, and just truly appreciate the time. With that, I'm going to wish you all a great day, and we'll see you soon. And if you can make it to San Jose next month, you'll be hearing announcements about our network meeting at the Merck campus in late October. Thank you very much, everybody. This has been Innovation and Impact, Prospect Silicon Valley. Have a good day.
Thanks
all.
so
Have a great day.
Thank you.